Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. My name is Barry Malkin with the Apollo Group, and welcome to our session on Moocs today. I'm very pleased to have a fantastic panel with us to discuss a very exciting subject. All the way on my right, let me introduce the panel. Amin Saberi, the CEO of Novo Ed. Phil Regier, the Executive Vice Provost and Dean of ASU Online. Steve Mintz, the Executive Director of the University of Texas System's Institute for Transformational Learning. Ryan Craig, a partner with University Ventures. And Jeremy Johnson, co-founder and Chief Strategy Officer from 2U. So thank you all for being here today. I'd like to engage this group in a discussion about their thoughts on the MOOC phenomenon and what everyone wants to understand, the impact they will ultimately have on higher education, and the ability for these companies to succeed long-term as sustainable businesses. The big three, Coursera, edX, Udacity, have had a truly remarkable effect on the educational landscape, not just as a result of their reach, which is impressive, but more importantly, the debate it has spawned about the future of education. Each one of the players has a nuanced approach to the market, but at the end of the day, are really sparking interesting and exciting debates and action around the cost of education, the role of the faculty versus the university, and ultimately the disaggregation of the university product. So great professors from great universities offering great courses for free. It doesn't take a MOOC-educated rocket scientist to understand the appeal. The bigger question is, are these companies creating Amazon.com or Pets.com? In other words, will MOOCs transform education or be a niche player for those seeking a one-off specialist course or to plug an academic hole? Let me start with Amin.
All right, so what's the question?
So we have a daydreamer. The question was, to what extent do you think that these are sustainable businesses? Are these going to be a flash in the pan, or do you expect real long-term business models to emerge from the businesses?
Right, so I think the MOOCs are like the first crack in the wall of the establishment. So what they show is that the current model for education is not working. The demand and supply are not meeting. Now, clearly it's going to evolve. Different models of revenue models are going to be tested. There's going to be a lot of changes. But I think in the end, clearly sustainable businesses are going to be built. It doesn't take, again, a MOOC-educated rocket scientist to see that they are creating a lot of value. Now, how that value is going to be transferred into a sustainable business, it's going to take some time.
Great. Phil, any thoughts?
Well, let me disagree with everything Amir just said. No. And also let me point out that to this point there are no MOOC-educated rocket scientists, and I think that's significant. It's difficult to understand whether they'll be sustainable or not. There's certainly another step in an evolution that probably began with MIT's Open Courseware initiative, which at the time was viewed as an incredibly disruptive thing that was going, people were going to be able to get MIT course content available, and why would they ever go to a public university again? And of course, there are still public universities and private universities all over the country. I think in the same way that the first generation of MOOCs are very interesting, they certainly changed the dialogue in a very positive way as far as I'm concerned. I no longer have to convince people that you can learn online. All of a sudden, everybody believes it. On the other hand, I'm not convinced that people are learning online from MOOCs. Most of the data that I've had available to me, and a lot of it's from Coursera, indicates that the completion rate is abysmally low, and that the people who are completing already have degrees. And the exception, I think, are international students who, if I was having this discussion in India or in Africa or many other places around the continent, I'd have a very different view of MOOCs than I do from kind of this particular perch inside the United States.
Ryan, you've written a few words on the topic.
I was going to say that
No, I'm going to come back to you. I've got other questions for you.
the completion rates only look bad if your denominator is those who intend to complete, according to Coursera. So of course, then your completion rate would be 100%.
Yes.
It goes back, the Mooc phenomenon goes back before MIT. I was involved in a venture with Columbia University in the late 90s called Fathom, which really was a proto-Mooc. And my lesson there was that, yes, elite universities are very comfortable providing content online, but not comfortable providing any kind of credential that carries any kind of value for students beyond the traditional degree program. And today, that hasn't changed. I think all Moocs show is that universities are comfortable providing content online and still not comfortable, in most cases, providing degrees or credentials that carry value online. Unfortunately, the model that has worked for decades or centuries in higher education is that degree-based model. We don't see that changing anytime soon.
Steve, why don't I go around the horn here? What's your thought? Is it Amazon or something other?
Worked at Columbia too, and I saw Fathom pour $30 million down the drain with no visible consequences. We all know that you should never say this time is different, but this time is different. And it may not be because of the Moocs, but in 36 months, higher ed is going to look fundamentally different, and Moocs are part of that process. One thing that's changing is the unbundling of degrees, right? Certificates are becoming more important as credentials than simply having a degree. Another change is a radical shift in delivery modalities. We're delivering things as competency-based modules, we're delivering things as accelerated courses, we're developing low residency programs. All kinds of changes are taking place in the way students are consuming education. Third, we're seeing a rapid shift towards competency-based assessment. And I suspect in 3 years that will be taken for granted at many public institutions, including many flagship campuses. In analytics will be of various kinds of learning dashboards will be part of every course. Are Moocs the cause of any of this? I don't know. Are Moocs going to play a crucial role in helping to facilitate this shift? Absolutely. Are Moocs providing opportunities for partnerships among university systems to discuss the future, the next generation of higher ed delivery? Absolutely. So, cause or effect? I don't know. Pet.com died, right? Fathom died. But Pet.com was part of a larger shift in the way you and I live. There's lots of casualties along the way, and we'll see which ones, but the changes that took place occurred despite the casualties.
So let me just build on your question for a second and tie it in. I mean, so could the commoditization of courses have the unintended consequence of forcing change within the university system in general? Is that, are Moocs simply, at the end of the day, change agents for this industry in order to kind of liberate open learning and the democratization of learning?
Well, they've certainly struck on what has been the perfect storm in this space. It's an incredibly sexy message, free courses, free education for everyone. And they've done it after 3 years of really consistent press around how expensive education is and how broken the system is. So it couldn't have happened at a better time to catalyze discussion around the entire industry. That being said, the reality of Moocs is they, at this point, are the sort of 21st century version of, in fairness, the American public library system. It's an extraordinary way to disseminate content knowledge, and we're going to learn a huge amount about it. We're going to learn a huge amount about how people engage online through it. But if people were capable of using entirely asynchronous approaches to educate themselves and to replicate a university experience, to replicate the type of experience that you would expect going to any of these campuses or engaging in live classes and live lectures with a professor who actually knows who you are, who knows your name and knows what your strengths and weaknesses are and can help guide you through that, then that would have already changed. That access was already there. This is a much more efficient way of it, but it's still a much better way to access content knowledge.
Steve?
I taught 40,000 students in face-to-face classes. I had 2% of all of Houston in my classes. That's the fourth largest city. And 1/3 of those students who had U.S. history in 3rd grade, 5th grade, 8th grade, and 11th grade failed that class. They were in a distance ed class. We can do better than that. And whatever one thinks about Moocs, they're not going to just be delivered as massive online courses. They're going to be delivered as modules. They're going to be delivered in Emporium formats. They're going to be adapted for teaching on individual campuses like they are at San Jose State right now. Don't think it's just going to come in one form. It's part of this, shift in delivery modalities that's going to take place on many, many campuses. We can focus on elite campuses, but remember there are 4,000 universities in America and a lot of unserved and underserved students. And we now have a vehicle for reaching them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The real benefit of Moocs is that we're actually having this discussion. The problem with this discussion is it is almost always the wrong discussion. The reality is we're just thinking about ways to leverage technology to improve education. There are multiple paths one might take to do that, reducing cost, increasing access, improving the overall student outcomes. Totally different paths, all trying to converge around a better use of technology. And we kind of, in large part for the past year and a half, have bundled the entire discussion around Moocs, as opposed to the individual components of it, as you were saying, Steve, that allow us to improve education through technology.
Yeah, I mean, we've made the point that we think it's an interesting conversation starter, and it's true now that every university in America and largely in the developed world needs to have an online strategy, and you can get fired if you're a president or chancellor and you don't have an online strategy now.
And then rehired.
But only if you change your mind.
That's right. So that is a positive development. That is going to encourage innovation. But the point that, to say that Moocs are, a game changer or somehow seminal in this discussion, typically the way these discussions progress is to make it useful, to make it beneficial to those who need access, namely those who currently don't have access to the system. It needs to become less of a MOOC and more like a traditional course. And so that's the thing that I'm struggling with, is to understand why then the MOOC is relevant at all. Isn't this just a discussion about online education or technology in education?
Well, Phil, did you want to say something? Or Amir?
So part of the reason the MOOC is relevant to the discussion is that it shows you the marginal cost of adding one student to one part of the education. It's not the whole educational experience, but it shows you that one part of the experience can be actually offered in a massive way. And also, it has brought the conversation at the level of, telling us, sort of, what is a university? Is it, sort of a football field and a, nice campus? Is it a place where we actually just select the students and then give them a degree? Is it a place where we gather them in a large lecture hall and just, tell them didactic, the sort of, deliver materials to them? Or is it a big, research body? And which part of it is going to be disaggregated, disintermediated? And how is this going to change the university system? I think these are very important, very fundamental questions, and that we are going to have to answer very soon, matter of a small number of years.
Those are great questions, but any university that thinks that it's solving those questions or answering those questions in a way which will contribute to its ongoing sustainability as an entity by joining Coursera or joining edX is misleading itself, because that's not going to help them.
Yeah. So this is not necessarily like sort of Coursera edX, but we learn a lot from offering courses at massive scale. All of my colleagues who tried offering a course, they tell me they are changing their on-campus course based on what they learned from their online course. It's just, by teaching 50,000 people, you will think differently about how you teach your course. You will, the signal is separated from the noise in a big way. You just realize the things you were doing wrong.
So if the Moocs are not fundamentally going to completely change the system, perhaps there's a different question. Is this the beginning of a DIY degree system? Are we going to see an iTunes approach to school where students are going to be able to ultimately pick and choose their own path to a degree among a variety of different providers, whether it be a Mooc, whether it be a community college for the lowest possible intro course?
So if I could, let me speak for a minute about that. So the fact is, most students at universities are already doing something like that. Students are typically, we tend to think of the way students go to universities at like the top 100 universities in the country. But the fact is, most students go through the other 1,600 universities in the country, and they all have what I used to refer to as the Sarah Palin transcript. She went to 5 or 6 different places before she graduated. And the fact is, students are already putting together community college work with state university work, with work at for-profits, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think that MOOCs are going to have a fundamental effect on that. When I look at the students who are interested, for example, in online education, they're 15 to 40-year-old students who have some post-secondary degree, but they don't have any success. And for them, success is not defined in more courses. Success is defined in getting a degree. And we should not think that MOOCs are going to fundamentally change the important things about the American education system that makes it the best in the world, which is that it requires students to go through a process that they would not normally subject themselves to. It requires engineering students to take religious studies or American history. It requires business students to take philosophy and psychology and other things that broaden students. And if you pick and choose, a business student will only take finance. Well, I like to think they would only take accounting classes. But in fact, they won't subject themselves to courses in quantitative science, which is absolutely necessary to be an educated person. And so I think it's important that we keep the incredibly interesting aspects of the American higher ed system and what it does in transforming students in a somewhat mystical way still kind of front and center when we consider what degrees are and what the impact of MOOCs. And MOOCs are a very important external stimuli. But I think universities will also respond to that stimuli. It's not as though we are going to sit here and not respond in important ways. I agree, we can learn a tremendous amount, and we should take advantage of the learning.
If we were sitting in a room of journalists, in 1990, we might be having a discussion that sounds just like this. But I was talking to the head of global training for ExxonMobil. He has 80,000 seats at Harvard Business School. And so don't tell me Harvard's not willing to sell its degree if it can figure out how to monetize it and it's not called a Harvard degree. We're going to see, I think, a lot of institutions blurring the lines between continuing education and their regular academic programs. ASU is a real leader in this. And you're going to be able to get a degree that says ASU on it or University of Texas at Austin. It's not going to be exactly the same. And a lot of people are going to vote with their feet, right? Because they'd rather get that prestigious credential, even if it says virtual college or extension school on it, than another college. So I think we're going to see some really dramatic shifts very quickly in this dog-eat-dog world.
So where do you think the credentials are going to come from? Because right now, it's not even clear that you can get a meaningful credential from, the certificates that I've seen from MOOC providers are, sometimes they even disclaim the notion that the student may not be the exact student because, we haven't authenticated that student's identity.
When we meet in 3 years, you will see name brand schools offering something that looks like a degree from those schools. Mark my words. I'm a historian. I can predict the past way better than the future, but count on that.
I could actually tell you about a couple really great schools offering full degrees now if you want at some point. It's already happening.
Right.
There's no question the world is moving in this direction.
Right.
And the reason is because you now actually can provably create online educational experiences that are just as good, or in some cases better, than on campus at great schools. You just can't do it without people. You can't do it without other students who are selected based on previous ability and who are driven to succeed, who have a vested interest in actually completing. Absent those interactions, you can't actually do it. I'm not saying technology is going to get better, and I'm not saying there aren't going to be areas in the sort of MOOC ecosystem where you can use completely asynchronous sort of adaptive learning methodologies to really improve outcomes, but that person still matters. And great schools are already doing it, and in 3 years, you're going to see a lot more great schools doing it. But we're well past sort of the bleeding sort of edge at this point.
Right, and a point we've made is that we think that MOOCs are a distraction to that. That actually they're going to have lots of schools who are selecting the MOOC strategy as their online strategy, as opposed to adopting an online strategy that will actually get them some traction in the marketplace.
At NovoEd, you're trying to create a differentiated product, and I think you're trying to work with collaboration in a more effective way than others. Given the scale of the MOOCs, which are impressive, are they in a unique place to perhaps experiment with technologies and perhaps drive some innovations in the market, however?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So right now, like sort of MOOCs have been this rigid box, right? Sort of this, like a Greek, but like sort of, when you have a course, you cut it, you sort of try to fit it into box, and the part of it that fits into the box is going to be blasted to the world. And in a sort of, it's been quite a bit, one way. And now sort of we are using the power of technology to actually make it about the students, to help the students interact with each other at a very massive scale. And, of course, institutions move slowly. Right now, we are not offering degree, or for example, when we partner with Stanford does not offer degree. But then we offered the course on entrepreneurship. And at the end, we said, maybe we can't give you a real certificate. And the students said, for being an entrepreneur, you don't need a certificate. I found my co-founder here. I found somebody I'm starting a company with. I learned how to negotiate my role in a team. I learned how to manage a team virtually. And these are the things that, sort of, when you talked about online education last year, these were not the competencies that you thought, would be fostered in an online environment. And now they can be done, and at a massive scale, at the scale of 50,000 students in one course. And we're going to continue to innovate, and we're going to continue to add, sort of more social, collaborative, and interactive components to this to make the experience richer.
That's a great example, by the way, of how limited this discussion has been. There are areas like entrepreneurship,
Sorry,
like
you feel that way.
like computer science.
Thank you, Barry.
Don't worry, Barry. It's okay.
You did a great job.
This isn't your day job. It's all right. I don't mean this discussion. I mean the discussion around MOOCs more broadly. And what I mean by that is that's actually a great example. The reality is there are certain things like entrepreneurship, like computer science, that don't require human systems to validate in the same way. On the other end of the spectrum, you have surgery or surgeons or maybe rocket scientists. You have
Civil
other
engineers,
areas.
right?
70% of the content at Stanford Medical School is taught online, and all of the practice for surgery is done through simulations, much of which is online.
Couldn't be more supportive of being able to do it online. What I'm saying is that, did I mention we do that? What I am saying is that you need to actually engage with real people to do that. What I'm saying is that we've been having this discussion for 2 years about whether or not MOOCs will be better, and the answer is there are some areas where you will be able to use asynchronous content to have better student outcomes. There are other areas where you fundamentally are not even close to it. And what we should be talking about is what are those areas and how do we advance them as much as we can, and that's going to be facilitated by the fact that over the next 3 years, we are going to move towards a world of much, much more perfect information. We're going to have much better data on student outcomes because we're not going to be able to not have it. Because schools are going online, you have actual competition between those schools. That data is going to drive sort of that desegregation of the conversation, and we're going to have to look at these individual areas as opposed to lumping them all together and saying all education is the same, which obviously isn't true.
Well, let's talk about efficacy for a second. So despite the success of the MOOCs, the products have experienced huge attrition. I think the completion rate is 95 or 5 or 7%. There's limited to no faculty interaction. There's crowdsourced assessments. I mean, can a school scale effectively at these levels? Despite our scale at the University of Phoenix, a little commercial, we're still at 14 to 1 faculty to student ratio. And we have huge support structures that are in place to support students from when they enroll, pre-enrollment, all the way through graduation. How can the Moocs possibly recreate this experience with such large numbers?
Right. So we have already gone from Moocs are good for nothing to now they're good for everything. I agree. No, I absolutely agree. So there are certain parts of the education that sort of can't be replicated at the scale of a MOOC. But when you think about the MOOCs, you can always add additional structures, and we will see support at the smaller group level. There will be newer add-ons that will at least make some progress in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, so then how is that a MOOC? I mean, again, this may be just sort of a silly discussion about nomenclature, but
yeah. So what's a MOOC? I don't know. So when it's massive, when it's sort of serving thousands of people at the same time, tens of thousands of people at the same time, let's call it a MOOC.
Well, I think both of these guys serve thousands of people at the same time, right?
So it's sort of it's one course. It doesn't have to have this flat structure of one instructor and 10,000 students playing the same role. You can have actually you can have groups. You can have several TAs. You can have a hierarchy. Whether you want to call it a MOOC or not.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that the massive component of this has just been way overstated as important. It's from a cost structure standpoint. If you look at the cost structure of delivering online education, the cost of actually having that mediation, that interaction, that instruction, that assessment in it is not that expensive. It doesn't have to be that expensive. And so somehow the notion that you can have one instructor teaching 50,000 people, that's, yes, you can do it for free then, but not really, because eventually someone's going to have to pay something to support this. So why not add in that interaction? And guess what? We have 3 million students in the U.S. already learning online today, doing exactly that, and they were doing that before anyone had ever heard of a MOOC.
So actually, let me grant this that there is this sort of arrogance in, say, Silicon Valley and sort of some that if we are doing it, then we must be the first people who do this, right? So no, yeah, absolutely. So there has been quite a bit of progress even before this wave of MOOCs, but it doesn't mean that that there is actually nothing new here. I think it's actually quite an innovation.
Not to put too fine a point on it, but the fact is, I think that we're probably all in agreement that MOOCs, for better or worse, are going to accelerate change in the educational system. And I think that we're also in agreement that you really can't get a reasonable credential that anybody would care about if you're sitting in a class with 50,000 people and one instructor. So to answer your question, I think it is nuts to think that you could actually have a university that consists of students taking courses with 50,000 students and one instructor and end up with anything that at the end of the day looked like a degree or a credential that would teach people to learn over an entire lifetime. I might be proved wrong, but I don't even think you would say, Steve, that in 3 years that sort of thing is going to happen. I also, by the way, I'm a little uncomfortable with Jeremy, who keeps invoking the role of kind of humans in the process. I do think that's very important, but technology also allows us to leverage what humans do so that we can take a faculty member and surround that individual with technology and actually amplify and increase the number of students that that faculty member is able to achieve. I don't know what the number is. I don't know if that's 1 to 100, 1 to 500. I think that once you start getting beyond that, your ability to interact or engage in a meaningful way is greatly reduced. You have to look at quality course material, online or otherwise, as forcing engagement around content or with other students or with faculty. And if you don't necessarily have that content or you can't measure it in a meaningful way, then I question whether we have a successful course going forward.
We're actually wildly in agreement, by the way, on the ability of technology to amplify the impact of a faculty member. And I actually think I have some idea of to what extent it can be done right now, but it varies from program to program. And what I think it sounds like you also agree with is that absent that faculty member, absent human engagement, we've talked about the 2 sigma difference quite a bit over the past couple of years. Maybe you can get it down to 1. There's a massive difference still between that standard deviation. The quality is not the same. And in fairness, we're playing in a very different world in that we're really catering to just the absolute best experience in each of these areas. So what we're trying to do is just improve upon that. And maybe we do go overboard in terms of wanting more, smaller student-faculty ratios and more direct human involvement. But I haven't seen tech that replaces that yet. I'd love to, but I haven't.
I actually wasn't talking about your company, for which I have a lot of respect. I was just saying that, I don't think that you need to overstate the importance of human interaction. I think that one thing that's clear is that technology allows us to leverage the faculty member, allow the faculty member to reach many more students than they were previously, and I'm not sure what the right number is. I'm not sure what a tipping point is. And by the way, I'm sure it varies very much course by course and discipline by discipline. But technology matters.
This
it's
is
a
not
tool.
your father's ASU, folks.
What's that?
This is not your father's ASU, folks.
No.
Moocs
Certainly
are
isn't.
MOOCs are, first of all, developmental laboratories. In developing auto-grading of free-form essays, this is very exciting. We don't know quite what to do with it, but it takes, $80 million used creatively to develop some of the really exciting things that we're seeing.
Well, Steve, how are you thinking about this? Because you're actually invoking a lot of this innovation in a closed environment, a very large but closed environment. So how are you balancing the on-ground versus the online and all the tools that you have available to you today? Because I think what you're doing is a bit of a microcosm for what others will be nationally what we'll be doing.
Well, first of all, we do view Moocs as developmental laboratories creating very expensive learning tools that can be leveraged across our system and used in a variety of ways. Secondly, they're clearly content providers that are going to be, again, consumed in a variety of ways. Western Governors University is now delivering its degrees largely through taking pieces of Moocs and other online courses that it then packages in different ways. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the future. Sebastian Thrun predicted that in 50 years, 10 institutions will be providing the content for undergraduate education, and that's certainly wrong. The figure will be 200, not 10. It's not going to be an unlimited number of institutions, I suspect.
I just want to.
It's going to be a lot lower than 1,700.
Yeah.
We're all in agreement there.
So-
Sorry, Ryan.
That's okay.
So in a recent Chronicle of Higher Education survey, most professors seemed enthusiastic about MOOCs, but 72% said that students who succeeded in their class, in their MOOC, should not be awarded college credit. So is this the ultimate contradiction that brings down the model? Will faculty and schools embrace the change that ultimately could weaken their competitive advantage?
I assume that survey was a faculty teaching MOOCs.
It was.
Because most faculty that I come into contact on a daily basis, you have a few who want to put their course up tomorrow, and then you have about 50 more who are very skeptical about what you can do with MOOCs. So I'm sorry, what was the question?
So what is, in essence, what is the motivation right now for the universities and the faculty to participate in this experiment?
I think that Steve has it right. I think that MOOCs provide a very important experiential platform, and we can learn a tremendous amount by offering MOOCs. We are going to be able to test some things at scale. We'll be able to test out some tools. Some of those tools are going to get better. You mentioned auto-grading. That's a perfectly good example. And so I think it's an experience. Like I say, MOOCs are an important external stimulus, right? But don't think that universities aren't going to change in response to that stimulus. They will, and MOOCs are going to be one path forward to learning a lot about scale and about technology as a tool.
Yeah. Steve, how about within your system?
I think that at least in some states, including my own, there is no question that the legislature and the regents are going to mandate some kind of competency-based testing that will allow those courses to be credited. And that will be transformative. You know, right now, 600,000 kids in California are closed out of the community college system. And whether Jerry Brown can get competency-based testing through in California, I don't know. I can assure you, Texas will offer it and go aggressively after those students.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that, you know, Moocs are the one thing they do. We talked about them being a sort of forcing the discussion in terms of online delivery, but they also force the discussion in terms of competency-based learning and also big data, right? I mean, if you have 50,000 students in a course, you know, you ought to be able to figure out what the, you know, the optimal learning objects and path through those learning objects are for different learning styles and so forth, if you have that amount of data. But the fact is, we have that data in our institutions today, and we're not taking advantage of it. So,
Well, and that's where you all will play an absolutely pivotal role in all this. We need a stack of services to deliver courses at scale. We can't do it. You can do it. Now, we're not going to turn to one single provider to provide all those services. We're not going to put all our eggs in one basket. And you all are going to have to compete to figure out who can provide that whole raft of services that we need, everything from coaching, you know, academic support, to registration, to transcripting, to financial aid. I mean, everything is going to have to be...
And to services that don't exist today,
Right.
like, for example, defining competencies
Yeah.
as part of
Yeah.
curriculum.
And
Yeah.
you all are going to do that, probably, not us.
So, Jeremy, ultimately, what do these businesses become? You know, all businesses begin, you know, morph many times before ultimately settling into their long-term business model. Amazon is no longer a bookstore. Tell me, in your opinion, do these become core course platforms? Do they become continuing education platforms? Do they become hobbyist education networks? Where do you think it goes ultimately?
So I think right now it's easy to bundle the big three together, like Udacity, edX, Coursera. Like we think of them as the big three and as being relatively interchangeable. I think that they've expressed different long-term intents, and I think that over time what you're going to see is them being forced in different directions. So Coursera, phenomenal engine for discussion. Challenging to think about how they build a business large enough to sustain the type of investment they've taken on. And the notion in Silicon Valley, which works from an ad tech standpoint, if you can get tens of millions of people, is that if you build it, it will come. If you have enough people and enough eyeballs, that you'll be able to monetize it. And if you're talking about an advertising-driven business, that's actually reasonable. Like, Facebook got big enough where they can put ads up, and initially with very little targeting or segmentation, and they're able to generate real revenue. But that's hundreds of millions,
That's
at least
800
tens of millions,
million,
now
versus
a billion
3 million,
people.
right.
But even when they started doing ads, Coursera's 3.1 million people 2 weeks ago, 8% of whom had actually completed a course, that's nowhere near enough to build an ad-driven model.
Well, but the bigger problem is that their model is based on partnerships with educational institutions that have no interest in ensuring that they have a viable business model at all. We had that problem with Fathom. I mean, Fathom we had 13 universities, museums, and libraries, and they had no interest at all in any kind of model that was sustainable. They were interested in projecting their content and having someone else pay for it, in this case, Columbia. Sorry about that, by the way.
And so I think what you're going to see is it's going to be challenged from a business model standpoint. I would be concerned as their investors. Udacity, the notion of being able to place these people in particular jobs, again, in certain areas like computer science, there are a handful of companies that would pay a lot for, the top 0.1% of people finishing your Python or Rails course. Like, there's actually significant demand, but you're talking about 50 people, 100 people, even at a very high price per head. That's really not going to sustain a significant business. And edX doesn't actually care about revenue. They don't need to. They're backed by more money than collectively we have here at this conference, which is a lot. And so they're going to be they're going to be fine, but they're going to look at this in a very different way. And over time, you're going to see the three of them diverge pretty significantly. I don't immediately see any of them turning into really significant businesses, but I see them having a really big impact on the conversation, and on discussions like this.
Well, I mean, we'll call it the Big Four now because we're going to throw Novo Ed in there as well. So tell me,
It launched last night. 16 million active users, right?
that's fantastic. So tell me, where is your business going ultimately? Where do you think this settles?
So hard to say. I can't say I sort of have the revenue model figured out. We launched yesterday.
What have you been doing for the last 20 years?
So let's talk about sort of some of the potentials. Let's say you can approach a single company and you say all your employees can work together in teams. They can work on a course in leadership, course in entrepreneurship, course on creativity. They can work together. They can work on actually something that sort of the top teams will be able to present this to the CEO of the company. Think about how much money is being spent by corporations for the education, and that's order of hundreds of billions of dollars. How much of it is going to universities? That's like less than $1 billion. So that's going to change. I think we will see a sort of certificates play a much stronger role, and this is an area where we're going to make a strong play.
I'd say that that evolves once you have some entity authority that is able to authenticate certificates as meaning that the students are able to actually demonstrate certain competencies, and I'm not sure how that actually comes about.
Right. Thank you for shooting down our revenue model in front of potentially our investors here.
The continuing education is a really relevant discussion, though. I think it is more likely to play a role from a revenue standpoint in continuing education and things like it, where the competency focus is really what the employer is looking for, than it is in traditional education, especially at the top end.
But how does the employer evaluate a certificate they've never heard of even from a reputable institution?
Great point, and technology, we all know changes very quickly and people change slowly. And so McKinsey is probably not going to take a certificate anytime soon, but we're going to see better and better methodologies for evaluating those specific competencies. And I think that in those areas, you're talking about continuing education opportunities where there is an assessment that is provable. It's less about like the liberal arts notion of developing the human mind. And so it becomes a little bit simpler to measure outcomes there.
So one thing I'd say is we're talking about continuing education in one way, which is kind of as a business-to-business play. But there's also a huge business direct-to-customer play with continuing education. And I actually think that's a place where the Moocs will be tremendously disruptive. Because these are the things that people used to sign up for on community colleges, non-credit courses in photography. They go on Saturday morning. I'm sorry, I think that stuff increasingly will be gone. If I can take a MOOC and learn the same amount of content, go through, learn what I want. I don't care if they certify that I learned or if they even certify that I'm Phil Regier or not. I think that will be disrupted by MOOCs.
The challenge, and most of the entrepreneurs in the room are probably thinking about sort of this specifically in that area. Education, second largest industry in our country behind healthcare. Massive amount of money. People look at it and say, wow, this is so exciting, so much innovation. We need to get involved in this. And the reality is you can very easily break education into innovation inside the system and outside the system, and revenue inside the system and outside of the system. And all of that money is inside of the system, all of that sort of that marketplace. And that's challenging from a political standpoint to get involved with, but there's a massive sort of stream or different areas of revenue. Outside the system, you have huge innovation taking place, but people rarely spend real money around that type of education.
So Silicon Valley is disrupting the learning annex.
Right.
Good job.
Yeah, or disrupting the learning company.
Phil, what about remediation? These courses tend to, I think, appeal to a certain segment of the population who's pretty motivated. 70% have college degrees. What role can these companies, these systems, provide in a remediation sense?
So So, the tremendous challenge, I guess, one of the tremendous challenges of the university system is being able to reach out to people, particularly in the lower 3 quartiles of the economic spectrum, and be able to make them successful in a university career. Students come into ASU all the time. 15% of our students, and so 10,000 freshmen, and you'll probably have 15% of those who are not qualified to go into a freshman mathematics course. Remediation is incredibly important for those students. At the same time, as a general statement, students who need remediation are not autodidacts, right? If they were autodidacts, they wouldn't need remediation. And by the way, one other thing that Moocs have done is familiarize everybody with the definition of autodidacts, which we didn't know a few years ago. So again, it's possible. There is a lot of good content out there that's available. There are companies here who are developing really good content that's available for free. They are not Moocs, they're content providers. And I can see stitching together some remediation with some of that free content or some content from Moocs, but it's got to be stitched together by somebody who at the end of the day is going to certify that the student is who they said they were, and then is going to be responsible for taking a student who has been remediated in some way and moving them into a path and a major at which they can be successful over time. So the answer is I'm not sure that it has a lot to do other than, some places might steal content or take the content from the Moocs. It's free, it's open. Take the content from the Moocs and put some remediation together, but that might not be the most efficient or effective way to do it.
So I want to open it up for a few questions. Before I do that, just real quickly, my last question for this group is, who is the biggest winner and who is the biggest loser as a result of the Moocs?
I mean, I would argue we're up there with one of the biggest winners. I mean, you look at this point, 3 years ago, there was a large swath of the high end of American higher education that thought the notion of anything online was, we'll figure it out eventually. They just didn't really care, and they didn't really feel the need to. I would challenge someone to pick 5 schools in the country now who don't have either a actual plan around online education, an actual plan around digital, or at least have put together a committee of faculty members to explore it and figure out what their plan is going to be. Everyone now feels as if they need to have a real discussion around what it's going to be.
So the loser is the university who hasn't thought about their long-term online digital strategy.
It will definitely be that person.
Ryan?
Yeah, I agree. The loser is the university who thinks that MOOC is a strategy online, and the winners are the service providers, the companies like 2U and Embanet and the like.
It's obvious who the biggest winners are. First of all, those students driven, talented in third world countries who now have access in a way they never did. Star celebrity professors, right, who now have global name brands, and elite universities that have now solved a political problem, which is they have huge endowments, but no more students today than they did in 1990 or 1980, and now can say they're serving more people. But who will benefit? That is in 3 years. That's really the question.
I think the winners are computer science faculty. Who would have thought that? Who would have thought 20 years ago that these guys would be on the vanguard of educational innovation?
and raising $50 million.
No, I think that the true winners are going to be students. They already are. A lot of people all around the world, United States included, are benefiting from this. The technology is going to change. We're going to try different solutions, but one thing that's sort of not going to change is this wider access to high quality content, to high quality educational experience, and I think it's only going to get better.
Great. Let me open up for a few questions. I think you had your hand up first.
Thanks. The observation I was going to make that the element that hasn't come into the conversation yet, it seems to me, is the type of course that's being addressed, or the level, I should say, right? So they're freshman courses, gen ed courses, the first 2-year of a four-year degree. I mean, these are already courses that are largely commoditized. I got a degree from Yale University, and I can tell you that the guy who taught me college calculus, right, who barely spoke English, like this was not some terrific Ivy League class. And I think that some of these subject matters can be addressed effectively in Moocs, and then obviously as you get up into the higher levels, you know, the places where Jeremy's company is working, you know, it's silly to think about a Mooc addressing. And so I just wondered if you all could address that dimension and whether there's a viable strategy in gen ed versus, you know, sort of fancier courses.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, people now are talking about commodity courses, like the lower division gen ed courses. And I think the natural response in an economic system to something being commoditized is that you try and increase the value of it through your current modality. And so I think that what you're going to see over the coming years, over the coming 24 months, are a lot of efforts to make gen ed courses better, to make them, for example, adaptive in ways that Moocs currently are not adaptive, to take advantage of big data, to work with some of the companies that are at this conference, and to make those classes better than they were previously. Again, it's part of the response of a system.
Well, our strategy is going to be a combination. We're going to put some courses into massive delivery, and then we're going to redeploy those faculty members in high-touch, high-impact practices like freshman seminars and freshman research experiences, right? Absolutely, absolutely.
Look, I mean, it probably depends on the service model that's
Yeah,
required for the
right.
course and the student as well, and that's what's going to dictate the cost.
Yeah.
I just want to say that there's one upper level MOOC that needs to happen because I would enroll in it, and that's the Udacity course to build a robot to teach a MOOC. So we could eliminate the instructor entirely. I think that's what we should do.
My observation, I'd like to test it, and a prediction I'd like to test is I think one of the reasons people aren't completing it is because you become your brother's keeper and you are scared to join the peer group because the peer group will be successful based on your participation. So I'm sure a lot of people are actually enrolling but not joining the peer group because they don't want to frustrate other people's success. So that's because in a sense we are one another's keeper. But the other thing is if the STEM thing with the political solution where third world people can come to this country and want to do a master's in STEM, they can get immediate green cards. I predict if that becomes reality, that US institutions will have 10 times the amount of students that will enroll, and they will use Moocs as a way to validate their interest and competency. And it will intimidate the American student who may not have that same resume of Mooc experience.
I think there was a question.
So my question is, do you agree with
Absolutely.
Starting with just the second question there, I think it's actually a really good point. You're definitely going to see American universities using distance learning in some form or fashion to better evaluate not just international students, so that's a very obvious use case, but also high school students, also sort of students who would like to, transfer students. You're going to see them having smaller and smaller bite-sized chunks that allow them to effectively evaluate students before they get there. MOOC isn't necessarily the answer. I think one of the main themes I feel running through this is that the notion of a MOOC as a way to solve all problems through technology is probably a bit of a fallacy. The notion of students being able to take courses online that are effective and that can be used as a real measure of their competency is absolutely happening and going to address problems exactly like that.
Right, and it can channel them into a pathway to the credentials that actually carry value.
I think that's right. I think we've got time for one more question.
Sure. So I am one of these weird individuals who comes from the tech world and the entrepreneurial world, but is now in the community college continuing ed world. And I would like to have you talk about the segmentation of age, because if you look at the age of the community college student, it's very different than what you see in the four-year university coming in. And how somebody in their 30s and 40s interacts with technology and uses technology and how they learn and how they engage is completely different. And what I hear you all talking about has been pretty much an 18 to kind of 24-year-old or 18, 30-year-old kind of environment. What we hear a lot is the desire for socialness, the desire for learning communities that are physical, that they actually, Phil, I disagree with you about continuing education in the community sector, because the reason people take those classes is to meet people and to
Yeah.
engage and to have a social life.
I understand that
it's a very
completely.
different world. If you just came to learn a camera technique, yeah, of course. But I think we're underestimating the social aspect and the physicality that I think isn't going to go away anytime soon.
Okay.
And I'm a tech person, so I'm all for what you guys are talking about.
Phil, we
So-
spoke a little bit about this when we.
I'm not sure exactly how to respond. But one thing I will say is that, the average age of students at ASU Online is 31 years old. We have 25% of our students are 45 years or older. We have tech issues, we resolve them. We have tutorials, et cetera, et cetera. And so I do think that, but if people want to go to a face-to-face campus, that's available, but there's this huge segment of the population for which a viable face-to-face experience isn't possible. They have kids, they are single moms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or they live in Timbuktu. And for those people, online makes a tremendous amount of sense. And by the way, I'm going to second what Jeremy says. It's not just that online is as good. The research consistently shows that the online learning experience is better than the face-to-face. Many faculty don't like hearing it.
If you have
But
a live,
that's
if you have a
using-
live faculty member
That's
also
using,
there.
and by the way, that's using tools that were available when the research was done, which is like 2007 and before. And the experience, the tools that are being developed now are simply going to increase the difference between face-to-face and online. And by the way, hybrid's the best.
Yeah.
All I guess I'm saying is that the modality is a huge continuum, and I think we can learn in different ways. I think they access technology in different ways, and we can't put them into this or that.
Yep.
I agree.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you to our panelists. That was an excellent discussion.